Hello, and welcome to the Sugar Bell Review, a program dedicated to learning about the people, places, and policies that make up the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek community. Thank you for joining us this evening. Tonight we have with us Bill Schieman. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Bill.
You're welcome.
Now, I have heard your name several times now when I spoke to Hope Taft and Aaron Rourke, and we met their cohort Rebecca Perry, who will be coming on shortly. And they've all said that you have been working with them and what they do around the area, particularly involving the river. You've gotten involved with that, and I was kind of interested just to know, first of all, how did you end up in the area? A little bit more about yourself. Would you mind filling us in some of those gaps before we move on to your work?
I can give you the short version.
Okay.
I was born and raised in the Dayton area, attended Wright State, went to work for a local phone company, good old Ma Bell, Ohio Bell.
Oh.
And, late in my professional career, I moved to the international side of the business and got to travel
Neat.
in the world. And I was lucky I was able to retire early. And after retirement, it's kind of like we come back to our roots. Even though I lived overseas at the time, I moved back to the Dayton area. And my very first job when I was in high school was with the Dayton Museum of Natural History. And, even though I worked in IT and computer science in a technical area, it's funny how I was kind of drawn back to those experiences. And in 2008, Ohio State University Extension launched an educational program called the Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalist program.
Oh, that's cool.
And I signed up and attended the first class and got my certification. And after that, it's just been a tornado of amazing and interesting educational and continued learning opportunities.
All of local, you're working with all the groups that take care of our local nature?
Yeah, so the Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalists do a lot of work in local and state parks. So right away I started working with people in the state parks in this area at Cedar Creek and Cowan Lake, and then when they dedicated the Little Miami State Park, the trail, or some people call it the bike path, I started working there. And in Bellbrook, I did many programs with the Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Park District where I would come in and speak on a topic of which I knew a little bit about. And the great thing about being an Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalist is you're not expected to be an expert. That's why we have PhDs at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
But what we try to do is we try to give good, solid scientific information, baseline information, and educate the public and hopefully make a difference in our communities and our local ecology.
And their understanding about the natural world around them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the magic of what I do is when you get a bunch of elementary kids together and take them on, elementary school children, and take them on a fossil hunt, or take them on a hike in the woods. Take them on a hike in the woods and find a garter snake or a cool bird's nest, and it's just amazing when you see not just children but adults really get engaged in a topic. A lot of them, especially on the adult side, they haven't been in touch with that subject matter for decades, and they also enjoy getting back in touch with nature and science.
Yeah, it was fun for me going on the field trip with my daughter to Cedars Creek for fossil hunting. It was, I'm not local originally, so it was a new area that I'd never explored, but it definitely was something cool about being able to hunt for these little pieces of history. It's neat that you're able to be a part of the community that way.
Yeah, that's where the magic is for volunteers like myself. And, we've all come through some really emotional and stressing times. I mean, we've got the COVID thing now. Depending on where you live, you got wildfires.
Yeah.
And if you look back on, the list goes on and on. If you look back in our history, we all have these every generation has multiple traumatic experiences. And through it all, nature is open. Nature remains open. And the exciting part about today, right now, the parks, the bike paths, the fossil hunting at Caesars Creek, it's packed all the time. People are just, nature's open, and people are just drawn to nature in times like this. But I'm here to talk about bald eagles. So.
Well, you also work with Rebecca doing the water quality
Yes.
and stuff of that nature too. So I knew that I wanted to hear about all of the parts and pieces of the local area you're a part of before we got on to your main topic for the evening.
Okay, so you know, I've talked about the Ohio Certified Volunteer Naturalist program. There are many opportunities for citizens, I'm talking about adults and young people, to get involved in what's known as citizen science, or that phrase is becoming overused now, so I like to call it community science. That's my new phrase now. And you're going to have Rebecca Perry on, and she is responsible, she works for the Department of Natural Resources, and she's responsible for the stream quality monitoring, where they go out and look at the mostly insect life, although they do look at snails and other forms of life, but mostly they're looking at insect life that lives in the water, because they're excellent indicators of water quality. So there are lots of programs. There are pollinator programs and
About the bees in the area and the plants that they like.
Yep, there's a long list of programs the public can get involved in. The program that she's going to talk about when she comes, the SQM program, has been run by the Department of Natural Resources here in Ohio for over 30 years, I believe now. So they've got 30 years of data. And you think about how many people have been churned through that program. Churn is kind of a pun on water.
Yeah.
But I mean, all the people through many decades who have volunteered, maybe worked for a year or two, then their lifestyle changes, they leave the program, other volunteers are always needed, and all of those people leave with a better understanding of things like water quality and what differences we can make. And some of those people, you know, just go back and educate their family. Some of those people are appointed to zoning boards and work in schools, and so the payoff potential is great in all of these citizen science
In terms
programs.
of spreading the information and trying to get it as far as you can to as many different people as possible.
Absolutely. And you know, if you're not a people person, if you just like to look at bugs, you know, and you just like to quietly study nature, these citizen science programs are also for you, because there's no requirement to be the
A teacher of
public
any kind.
speaker who sits here in this chair and you know, bugles the importance of these programs. If you just want to do your own quiet part, you're equally welcome.
Yeah, a little bit of data collection is just as important.
Absolutely. And we kind of we're coming out of a culture where we thought the only valuable data had to be collected by trained scientists. And we're finding more and more examples where citizen science, community science collected data is very important. There are lots of things, lots of contributions that citizen science have made that were either overlooked or not focused on by the professionals. So the professionals themselves are now promoting citizen science and community science for what it's contributing.
It's more like they add to the big picture.
Yeah, so I'm going to give you an example of that, which will be another kind of a segue into more detailed talk about bald eagles.
Yay.
So the Department of Natural Resources this year, early in 2020, announced a citizen science program where they ask everybody, every resident of the state, to report bald eagle nests. if they knew of a bald eagle nest, if they saw a bald eagle nest, they suspected it was a bald eagle nest, call the Department of Natural Resources and report it.
I saw this thing. I think it was a nest, but I'm not 100% positive. But
You
it was
can
right
still
here.
report it. You can
Okay.
still report it. So they received around 2,500 reports from the public
Okay.
early this year. They went out, Department of Natural Resources went out and investigated all of the reports. Of course, many of them were duplicates. Lots of people reported the same nest over and over again. They already had a database of nests that they knew about. That database was 8 years old, and it had less than 300 nest sites on it. So they fly helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft. They go out and they verify all these sightings. When they tabulated the numbers in May or June, I think it was June, they were shocked. 707 bald eagle nests had been documented in the state.
So more than double.
More than double. And they could never have had that impact without those 2,500 reports out there. I mean, you would need an army of biologists, working in the field. And just
All those
that,
extra eyes.
absolutely. And just that extra data, I mean, it is already having an impact on what's happening with bald eagles, our planning for bald eagles.
The health of the population.
Yeah, the population is actually, we knew it was growing and we knew it was healthy, but I mean, this was amazing data. And it's a good example of how citizens and community can add to the picture.
Can help support.
And there are lots of other examples in other disciplines. So community science and citizen science are the same thing.
I'm assuming that the Department of Natural Resources for Ohio would probably be a good place to start if a person was interested in learning about some of the options available for learning citizen science type programs.
Absolutely. A lot of them are centered in what we call extension, Ohio State Extension, OSUE.
Okay.
They have a mission of public education, reaching out. They've launched many citizen science programs, and I'll forward you some information, and you can put it up in
I'll make sure it's
closing
included
credits.
in the interview.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. Now, how did you get involved with the eagles specifically?
So I did my OCVN training in 2008, and I kind of generalized in some things. I did fossil hunts and took families and children on hikes, and I still run into some of the people that I did those in those early years. And one day I was doing a canoe hike, if you want to call it that, a canoe excursion at Cowan Lake, and it was in 2012 in the summertime, and I was leading a naturalist canoe paddle in the evening at Cowan Lake.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was really fun, and it's amazing, and I'm pointing out the wildlife and the turtles and the birds and all of this. And from behind me, I didn't even see it coming, a large bird flew overhead and banged into the water right in front of our canoes. I mean, within 30 yards in front of us, and it was a mature bald eagle.
Fishing.
Yeah, it just said, "I want that fish," and it just crashed down in the water and grabbed the fish.
I'm sure that startled more than one person in your little...
Yeah. Everyone who was on the canoe trip that evening will remember that experience. And that winter, I was doing a hike, and I saw at Cowan Lake a bald eagle flying over with about a 4-foot twig. It's not a twig, a limb of a tree.
Wow.
And I made a mental note of the direction the bald eagle was heading, and did some research about when they nest. And I coupled together seeing the bald eagle in the summertime, and myself and another bird watcher in late January, early February, discovered the nest site, and we started watching it. And that was in 2000. That was in 2013 was the first nesting season. So it was 2012 when
You saw the.
when we saw the eagle the first time, and 2013 we discovered the nest in the wintertime. And at the same time, someone else told me about a nest at Spring Valley Wildlife Area.
Okay.
So I said, well, since I'm going to be watching this nest, I may as well be watching a nest at Spring Valley.
Is that the one that you were gonna that you saw when you were on the river adventure that Hope
Yes.
first told us about?
Yes.
Okay. It's
Yes.
that
So
nest.
Hope already mentioned that. So these were the only two nests, the one near Cowan Lake. It's not actually on Cowan Lake, it's on private property near Cowan Lake. And the one at Spring Valley, they were the only two known nests in this part of the Little Miami watershed. So I focused just primarily on the Little Miami watershed. And that means that all of the creeks and streams and ponds in our area
That feed it.
eventually drain into the Little Miami. And so we had two known bald eagle nests at that time on the what we call the upper Little Miami, and I considered Cowan on the upper. There isn't really a technical definition of where the upper is, but anyway, so I started watching them. Today we have 8 nests in the
Wow.
same geographic area. That first
So
year,
this upper watershed
yeah,
area.
yep, in the upper watershed part of the Little Miami River. That first year, we fledged 2 bald eagles
One in
out
each
of those
nest?
2 nests. No, one nest failed. The other nest fledged 2 bald eagles.
Aw.
And this past 2 years, we've fledged 8 eagles each of the past 2 years.
Okay, so 16. So 8 the first year and then 8 the next?
So 16 in the last 2 years. Over the 8-year period, I've been observing 43
New
bald
baby
eagles.
Oh, wow.
I mean, these are fledged, so
They make it to-
sadly or occasionally you lose some in the nest. Literally, sometimes they're knocked or fall out of the nest and meet their demise. But in this part of the Little Miami River watershed, in the past 8 years, we've fledged 43 bald eagles.
That's super exciting.
It is. When I was young, I hunted and fished all the time. My dad primarily was a fisherman, and I was the oldest of 3 children, and every time Dad wanted to go to the stream or to the lake, Mom would say, "Take Billy with you." No matter how quietly he tried to sneak out of the house and go alone, "Take Billy with you," I'm sure was, he cringed every time he heard it. But it had an effect on me. I was 14, 15 years old before I saw my first bald eagle. And I lived outdoors all the time. I mean, so for my generation, we remember when there weren't any bald eagles.
Because they were so rare.
They were really, really, really rare. And, for me to have never seen one, and I'm out there sometimes deep in the woods, sometimes spending days. My dad would go camping. We would be in southern Ohio, all over Ohio, but primarily in southern Ohio, camping on remote streams. And when I saw that first bald eagle, who was actually sitting on a gravel bar on Ohio Brush Creek, just casually eating a dead fish, just like, John J. Audubon could have
Chilling
been.
and eating dinner.
Yeah, and it was amazing. And
Wow.
Ohio was like all the other lower 48 states. By the early 1960s, the bald eagles had almost totally disappeared. There were less than 1,000 breeding pairs left in the lower 48 nationwide.
Wow.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, was really concerned they were disappearing at a high rate. In the 50s and early 60s, they didn't know why. We eventually found out why.
The DDT?
DDT. And we almost lost them. Ohio was down in the early 70s. Ohio got down to 4 known nesting pair.
So we went from 4 known nesting pair to having 16 new babies just in 2 years.
Just in Little Miami. And just on the Little Miami. The news in Ohio is we went from 4 nesting pair, and they were nesting, but they weren't always successful because they had thin shells, so a lot of the nesting pairs weren't even raising any young.
They were trying.
They were trying. Today, we have over 600 nesting pairs. We have over 700 nests, but of course not all the nests are occupied.
Yeah.
But 600 is a pretty good guess of how many nesting pair. You take a state like New York State, for instance, it's kind of the poster child. Well, all the lower 48 are poster child, but in New York State, in the mid-1960s, 1970, they could only find 1 nesting pair of bald eagles in the entire state. That includes the Delaware, the Hudson River, Lake Ontario, the St. Lawrence Seaway, all the Finger Lakes. They were gone. I mean, many of the states came within a hair's breadth
of just losing
the bald eagles. And then it actually started before Congress took action. A very famous book was published. Rachel Carson published Silent Spring in 1962, and it launched a revolution. It changed the world.
It's the power of natural conservancy in action.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I work with children every chance I get, and I just say, especially to young women, I just say, there was this woman biologist, and she made a difference.
She made it, so you can too.
She really did. And then we had a golden age of, 10 or 11 years. Rachel Carson books come out in 1962. Everyone's reading it. 1963, we passed the Clean Air Act. 1966, the first Endangered Species Act was passed. 1967, the bald eagle goes on the endangered species list. 1972, we passed the Clean Water Act.
Wow.
So you think about those things. Oh,
And the
and
difference
in
they've made.
1972, after over a 10-year struggle, DDT was finally banned in the United States.
And the difference it's made has been incredible.
It is an incredible difference, but it took a long time because if you just look, we get back in Ohio and you look at, let's say we had 4 breeding pair and they were just marginally able. Once the DDT got out of the food chain, they started producing eggs that had stronger shells, and slowly the population would build up. But it takes a bald eagle 5 years before it reaches sexual maturity so it can reproduce. So those bald eagles have to survive fledging, survive 5 years before they find mates and nest. So it takes a long time. And the numbers were all trending in the right direction, but there wasn't anything, to cheer about yet until we reached a tipping point, probably in the late 90s or the early 2000s. As we slowly build up the number of breeding pairs, we were finally in Ohio producing enough young eagles that could survive to adulthood, and then the numbers took off. So usually when you say you reach a tipping point, you use that in a negative term.
But this was a positive one.
This was a positive tipping point.
Thank you so much for taking the time this evening to come out and tell us about the eagles in our area and a little bit about the history of eagles and how to get into being a citizen scientist in our area and the importance of it. We really appreciate you taking the time this evening with us, Belle.
I enjoyed being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you learned a little something about the area and about ways that you can get involved to help make the community stronger. And we hope that some of the advances that have been made for the eagles in our area continue to be there to support them. So have a great night. We'll see you next time.